Hello, we are going to have another chapter of Princess and the Goblin today. So in the last chapter that you read, the goblins came up with a couple of plans that we overheard, although one of them is still very secretive, plan A. But what was plan B that the goblins are coming up with to ruin the miners and to get revenge on the king? That's right, to flood the caverns or flood the mines, which would kill all the miners down there. So Curdy overheard this, but he wants to hear more. So we're going to find out a little bit more in the chapter today, although we're going to, from Curdy over to Irene's part of the story in today's chapter called The Princess's King Papa. The Princess's King Papa, or maybe King Papa, but I like to say King Papa. So let's begin reading today. I have a different website that I'm using for us, but let me present it there now. Okay. Oops. Oh, sorry, that was chapter 9, last chapter. Let's get to chapter 10. This one has some pictures, which is nice to go along with the ones in the book a little bit more. So actually, let me know once again how it works for you guys. But it may be good just to read directly from this page, but let me know if it ends up being too small. Okay, so there's little Irene with her dad, the king. We're going to hear more about him in the chapter. Now, the weather continued fine for weeks, and the little princess went out every day. So long, a period of fine weather had indeed never been known upon that mountain. The only uncomfortable thing was that her nurse was so nervous in particular about being in before the sun was down, that often she would take to her heels when nothing worse than a fleecy cloud crossing the sun through a shadow on the hillside. And many an evening they were home a full hour before the sunlight had left the weathercock on the stables. So why is it that she's being so nervous? Because she had the Princess Irene out at dark, and she really was at risk of being hurt by the goblins. So if it had not been for such odd behavior, Irene would by this time have almost forgotten the goblins. She never forgot Curdy, but him she remembered for his own sake, and indeed would have remembered him if only because a princess never forgets her debts until they are paid. Do you know what debt she has? And a debt means something to pay off. She owes him something. Do you remember what she owes him? That's right, a kiss. She promised him a kiss as a thank you for saving her, and she never got him that kiss. Now, one splendid sunshiny day, about an hour after noon, Irene, who was playing on a lawn in the garden, heard the distant blast of a bugle. A bugle's kind of like a trumpet. Bum, 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 bum. Something like that would be the noise she heard. She jumped up with a cry of joy, for she knew by that particular blast that her father was on his way to come see her. Now, this part of the garden lay on the slope of the hill and allowed a full view of the country below. So she shaded her eyes with her hand and looked far away to catch the first glimpse of shining armor. In a few moments, a little troop came glittering round the shoulder of a hill. Spears and helmets were sparkling and gleaming. Banners were flying, horses prancing, and again came the bugle blast, which was to her like the voice of her father calling her across the distance, "Irene, I'm coming!" So she must think very fondly of her father, right? She is so excited to see him. Right here on, this is where we're beginning. On and on they came until she could clearly distinguish the king. He rode a white horse and was taller than any of the men with him. He wore a narrow circle of gold set with jewels around his helmet, and as he came still nearer, Irene could discern the flashing of the stones in the sun. It was a long time since he had been to see her, and her little heart beat faster and faster as the shining troop approached. For she loved her King Papa very dearly, and was nowhere so happy as in his arms, as we see here. Oh, so sweet. When, that's where we are, they reached a certain point, after which she could see them no more from the garden, she ran to the gate, and there stood till up they came, clanging and stamping, with one more bright bugle blast, which said, "Irene, I am come," meaning I'm here now. By this time, the people of the house were all gathered at the gate, but Irene stood alone in front of them. When the horseman pulled up, she ran to the side of the white horse and held up her arms. The king stopped and took her hands. In an instant, she was on the saddle and clasped in his great, strong arms. Oh. I wish, right here, I could describe the king so that you could see him in your mind. He had gentle blue eyes, but a nose that made him look like an eagle. At this point, I think I will zoom a little closer. Since it's going all the way back and forth. But you did get to see a picture of what her King Papa looked like this as well. So I wish I could describe the king so that you could see him in your mind. He had gentle blue eyes, but a nose that made him look like an eagle. He had a long, dark beard, streaked with silvery lines, flowed from his mouth almost to his waist. And as Irene sat on the saddle and hid her glad face upon his bosom, it mingled with the golden hair which her mother had given her, and the two together were like a cloud with streaks of the sun woven through it. Oh, that was more beautiful of a description than the picture showed. How would you describe him? Gentle but strong is what I would say about him. He has that long, dark beard and a nose like an eagle's strong nose, but gentle eyes shows that he is a loving father. Now, after he had held her to his heart for a minute, he spoke to his white horse, and the great beautiful creature, which had been prancing so proudly a little while before, walked as gently as a lady, for he knew he had a little lady on his back. Through the gate and up to the door of the house. Then the king set her on the ground and, dismounting, took her hand and walked with her into the great hall. Just a moment. Which was hardly ever entered except when he came to see his little princess. There he sat down with two of his counselors who had accompanied him. Counselors in this case is talking about the people, like men who work alongside him, like assistants, who accompanied him to have some refreshment. And Irene sat on his right hand, and not on his right hand, it means beside, and drank her milk out of a wooden bowl curiously carved. After the king had eaten and drunk, he turned to the princess and said, stroking her hair, "Now, my child, what shall we do next?" This was the question he almost always put to her first after their meal together. And Irene had been waiting for it with some impatience, for now, she thought, she should be able to settle a question which constantly perplexed her, which means confused her. "I should like for you to take me to see my great old grandmother," Irene says. What do you think King Papa says of this great-great-grandmother? The king looked grave, which means serious, and he said, "What does my little daughter mean?" So, does he not know that his grandmother is up in the attic? I mean, the Queen Irene, little Irene says. I mean the Queen Irene that lives up in the tower, the very old lady, you know, with the long hair of silver. The king only looked at his little princess with a look which she could not understand. "She's got her crown in her bedroom," she went on, "but I've not been in there yet. You know she's there, don't you?" "No," said the king very quietly. "Oh, then it must all be a dream," said Irene. "I half thought it was, but I couldn't be sure. It's only been that one time, and she's just confused." Now I'm sure of it. She's sure it's a dream. Besides, I couldn't find her the next time I went up. Now at that moment, a snow-white pigeon flew in at an open window and settled upon Irene's head. What do we know about pigeons? Well, they are a symbol like a dove of hope and purity. But we also know from this that the queen eats their eggs, pigeons' eggs. So let's continue. She broke into a merry laugh, covered a little, and put up her hands to her head, saying, "Dear Dovey, don't peck me. You'll pull out my hair with your long claws if you don't mind." So she's being playful, just showing it off. But remember that connection to the Queen Irene upstairs, who may or may not be a dream. Now the king stretched out his hand to take the pigeon, but it spread its wings and flew again through the open window, when its whiteness made one flash in the sun and then vanished. The king laid his hand on the princess's head, held it back a little, gazed in her face, smiled half a smile, and sighed half a sigh. "Come, my child, we'll have a walk in the garden together," he said. "You won't come up and see my huge, great, beautiful grandmother then, King Papa?" Huge, great, beautiful grandmother. So she thinks it's a dream, but she is asking still questions. "Not this time," said the king very gently. "She's not invited me, and great old ladies like her do not choose to be visited without leave asked and given." The garden was a very lovely place. Being upon a mountainside, there were parts in it where the rocks came through in great masses, and all immediately about them remained quite wild. Tufts of heather grew upon them, and other hardy mountain plants and flowers. So these are kind of rough flowers. They just look wild. While near them would be lovely roses and lilies and all pleasant garden flowers. They're all the typical garden flowers, plus the things that you would see just out in the wild going on a hike. This mingling of the wild mountain with the civilized garden was very quaint, and it was impossible for any number of gardeners to make such a garden look formal and stiff. Against one of these rocks was a little garden seat. You all seen ones like that? Maybe concrete, kind of a little seat just in the garden, shadowed from the afternoon sun by the overhanging of the rock itself. There was a little winding path up to the top of the rock, and on top another seat. They sat on the seat at its foot because the sun was hot, and there they talked together of many things. I think I've got a little picture of the little garden seat. Yep, here is the King Papa with the little princess. At length the king said, "You were out late one evening, Irene." "Yes, Papa, it was my fault, and Ludi was very sorry," she says. "I must talk to Ludi about it," said the king. "Don't speak loud to her, please, Papa," said Irene. "She's been so afraid of being late ever since. Indeed, she has not been naughty. It was only a mistake for once." "Once might be too often," murmured the king to himself, as he stroked his child's head. Thought he was going to stroke his beard, but he stroked her head. And even though Ludi didn't mean to, it really could have been something that made Irene die, because we know how vicious those goblins are and how they want to have any revenge they can on the king. So he's saying, Ludi could have been the reason that you died just then. Once might have been too many times. So I can't tell you how he had come to know, Irene thought. I'm sure Curdy had not told him. Someone about the palace must have seen them, after all. He sat for a good while thinking. There was no sound to be heard except that of a little stream, which ran merrily out of an opening in the rock by where they sat, and sped away down the hill through the garden. Then he rose, and leaving Irene where she was, went into the house and sent for Ludi, with whom he had a talk that made her cry. Which might seem harsh, but it really could have killed Irene. Ludi needs to be very aware that that was serious. When in the evening he rode away upon his great white horse, he he left 6 of his attendants behind him, with orders that 3 of them should watch outside the house every night, walking round and round it from sunset to sunrise. It was clear he was not quite comfortable about the princess. So he has put some people in charge of watching his daughter, Princess Irene. And we shall see if that is enough to keep her safe. What do you think? Okay, so our next chapter is the old lady's bedroom. So what do you think that means? The old lady's bedroom. And we know that Irene doesn't quite believe that she really saw her great-grandmother anymore, and that she thinks she's got this crown in her bedroom, but she's still unsure. Like, was that real or was that a dream? So we'll see what happens in the next chapter tomorrow in your reading. So you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.